Logo of the U.S. Department of Education. CIPP-GPRA GPRA at westat.com.
Hi everyone, this is Carmen Sanchez from the Office of Special Education Programs at the U.S. Department of Education. We're going to start the webinar now on the performance measure collection for the OSEP parent program in 2018. Joining me are two people with our new contractor, Elaine Carlson and Carrie Willis from the westat.com, and you see their email address there. They're the new contractors, and we'll talk a little bit about the new contractor later on in the webinar. But a couple of housekeeping things that I want to remind you all about. First of all, everybody's on mute, but you can certainly use the chat space in order to have any of your questions, and we'll try to have some time at the end of the webinar for questions. Secondly, if you need to have a transcript, if you go in the chat space, you'll see the link for real-time captioning transcription for you to follow along if you need that. So please look in the chat space if you'd like to have that. And third, there is a document that lists everybody who's been chosen this year to participate in the parent program measures. It's organized according to region. There was instruction, and we'll have our tech person put it in the chat space how you can access that and download that. The reason I mention that is although we believe most people have, well, everyone has been informed last week that they were in the pool to participate on the data collection this year. Some people may not be aware of it quite yet because of the mail may have gotten into their spam box or something like that. So we want you all to be really aware of the fact that that's happening. So I believe it's the link that says 2018 Parent Centers for Performance Measures. If you click on that, you can download the document and see if your center was chosen and for some reason you didn't get that information. But please do check your spam boxes. They were sent last week, the notifications. So without further ado, I'm going to go on to the second slide on our presentation. The purpose of this webinar is to demystify the process for collecting the program measures and clarify what's expected of you all in the 2018 data collection. While most of the webinar is intended for an audience of the projects that were chosen for the collection this year, all parent program projects can benefit from listening to the webinar. We also want to stress that it's okay if everything is not clear to you. If you're one of the projects chosen, Elaine and Carrie are available to answer your questions, but in addition, you have a lot of TA that's available to you from your regional parent technical assistance centers. So you can use them also in order to become more aware of what you need to do. Parent program projects have done a fabulous job with the data collection in the years past, and I think that you will all do a fabulous job with the 2018 collection. I will also be going over in this webinar what the results were for 2017, and they really speak to the kind of real seriousness with which you take the collection of the program measures and the extent to which all of you have improved in your ability to describe your projects in a way that does justice to the work you're doing. So what are program measures? The federal government wants programs to work, and therefore it has to assess all the programs to make sure they're working well for the American people. And program measures required under the Government Performance and Results Act, otherwise known as GPRA. You know GPRA, the word GPRA from the GPRA measures when you do your annual report. And the purpose of GPRA is to make sure that the programs funded by the federal government actually work. You can see from this slide that the criteria that the Office of Management and Budget uses to rate programs. The Office of Special Education Programs has used essentially the same criteria for determining program effectiveness for many years. And programs are rated as effective, moderately effective, adequate, inadequate, or results not demonstrated, which is the last bullet. We've used the same ways of determining that for quite a few years now. So many of you who have been in the parent program for a while are quite familiar with this.
All federal agencies must report the results of their performance measure to the Office of Management and Budget.
So, OSEP performance measurement. The process that OSEP uses involves having what they call short and long-term measures of performance. Short-term measures are more output and process-oriented in the sense that they focus on the qualities of the services that our program provide, including the cost. Long-term measures are more outcome-oriented. That is, that they focus on how the recipients of the services view the services or respond to those services. But most importantly, short-term measures are collected and reported every year, while long-term measures are collected and reported only every 2 years. Please keep this in mind while we discuss the long-term and the short and the long-term measures for the parent program.
Short-term performance measures 1 and 2. Objective 1 of 3. Improve the quality of parent training and information projects.
So in the parent program, we have a total of 4 short-term measures. The first 3 are what we know, which having to do with quality, relevance, and usefulness. So we ask you to provide information about quality, relevance, and usefulness in your annual reports, so you're quite familiar with them. You're familiar with QRU. Since last year, we have also required that you provide information about your project measures that align with these 3 short-term program measures of quality, relevance, and usefulness, or QRU. Notice in the wording here on the screen that for the first 2 measures, quality and relevance, it's an independent review panel that determines the program measures ratings in the program measure collection. WESTAT, or CIPP, is responsible for assembling that independent review panel and providing them with the instructions for rating the quality, relevance, and usefulness for the services. As we will discuss, the review panel will base their ratings on information provided by the chosen centers. Notice, too, in the screen references to materials and products. This is wording that goes back almost a decade, and we recognize that over time, the only way we can get to these judgments is by reviewing the services provided by the centers. So what you're going to be getting information about is how to provide information about your services, even though the measures actually sometimes refer to products also here. So let me read the actual wording of the first 2 measures. Measure 1.1 of 4 says that the percentage of materials used by Parent Training Information Centers projects deemed to be of high quality by an independent review panel of experts qualified to review the substantive content of the products or services. Measure 1.2 says the percentage of Parent Training Information Centers products and services deemed to be of high relevance to educational and early intervention policy or practice by an independent review panel of experts qualified to review the substantive content of the products or services. As I said, the independent review panel is put together by WESTAT.
Short-term performance measures 3 and 4. Objective 1 of 3. Improve the quality of parent training and information projects.
Now, if you look at, here's the wording for the 3rd and the 4th term, short-term program measures. Measure 1.3, the usefulness measures, is the percentage of parent training information centers products and services deemed to be useful to improve educational and early intervention policy or practices by an independent review panel of experts qualified to review the substantive content of the products or services. And the last measure is an index of the federal cost per unit of output provided by the Parent Training Information Center program. So we changed the wording to, this was several years ago now too, to reflect that that number, this index, isn't necessarily a dollar amount, but rather it's, because that's actually almost impossible to determine for a variety of reasons I won't necessarily go into. Rather, an index is a way of seeing that the number of services relative to the program funding and how that changes over time. So I'll go and discuss these in more detail in a little bit, but I just wanted to remind you of this being the language of both for usefulness and, in this case, the cost measure, the short-term measure. The long-term performance measures that are collected every 2 years. Both of these long-term performance measures are about how families respond to the services that are provided. The first measure is about what families learn about their idea, rights, and responsibilities, and the second is about their ability to work with others in order to help their children. The second measure was changed last year. In addition, last year, actually it was changed in 2016. And in addition, in 2016 was the first year for the new program measure survey, which asked new questions of a random selection of families. Neither measures was collected in 2016. It was collected in 2017. And even we will not formally collect it in 2018, but we will have a sense of what that number looks like in 2018 also, and I'll explain that in a little bit. Since the second measure was changed and the methods for collecting both of these two long-term measures have changed, the collection this year will be used in order to eventually come up with a baseline. So we measured it in 2017. We have that data, and I will show it to you. But we're still in the process of determining baseline after we have few years of collecting this data. As you can see, that the actual wording of the measures are the first long-term measure is parents served by the Parent Training Information Centers will be more knowledgeable about their idea, rights, and responsibilities. And the second one is parents served by the Parent Training Information Center program will be able to work with schools and service providers effectively in meeting the needs of their children. So going back to the quality performance measure, the first of the short-term measures, how is that measured? It is done on a score out of 9 possible points across 2 dimensions, substance and communication. A score of 6 out of those 9 will be considered high quality. So if you look, so the independent panel reviewers will judge the quality of the service by scoring each dimension on a 4-point scale, even though it's really the score is 0, 1, 2, and 3, with 2 being moderately high quality, 3 very high. And then for the communication, they will also score it on that same scale, with 0 being a very low quality, to 1 moderately low, to 2 moderately high, and 3 very high. The substance dimension will be counted twice, which means that whatever the score is, if it's a 3, it will receive 6 points for that one, and that's how we then add that up in order to determine whether or not that the score is at least a 6 out of 9 possible points. If you look at how they're going to be measured, when we're looking at substance, the reviewers are going to be answering the question, does the content delivered through the service reflect evidence of conceptual soundness and quality grounded in legislation and policy? And then when they're looking at the communication, they're going to determine whether or not they're going to answer this question, is the content delivered through the service presented in such a way so as to be clearly understood as evidence by being well organized, free of editorial errors, and appropriately formatted. So that's what they're going to be looking at when judging your work. When those centers will be submitting their materials, will then essentially write to these questions and help the reviewers determine how they're going to respond to these questions in determining the quality of the service. In looking at relevance, again, it's the same scale. You'll get 6 out of 9 possible points across 3 dimensions. Each of the dimensions will count, will get 0 to 3 points from the reviewers. The first dimension is the need dimension. Does the content delivered through the service attempt to solve an important problem or deal with a critical issue? And again, those of you who are chosen will write to that in your description and show how your content does attempt to solve an important problem or deal with a critical issue. The pertinence dimension has to do with, does the content delivered through the service address a problem or issue recognized as important by the target audiences? And then the reach has to do with, to what extent is the content delivered through the service applicable to diverse segments of the target audiences? So those are the things that they're going to be, the reviewers are going to be looking at. And again, anything that's a 6 through 9 is considered high relevance. In terms of usefulness, again, it's the same thing. It's a score of 6 out of 9. There are 2 dimensions, and like in quality, one of the dimensions, I have to look at my notes to see which one has the double score. I believe it may be the suitability, but I will get back to you on that. The ease dimension has to do with does the content delivered through the service address a problem or issue in an easily understood way with directions or guidance regarding how the content can be used to address the problem or issue. And the suitability dimension is, does the service provide the target audiences with information or resources that can be used again or in different ways to address the problem or issue? So that's what the reviewer is going to be looking for when they're looking at usefulness. And in your directions, when you're actually submitting your description, those of you who have been chosen, you'll be getting information about how you can do your write-up in a way that answers this and makes it easier for the experts to look at this.
An index of the federal cost per unit of output provided by the Parent Training and Information Center program.
I also want to say a comment about the folks who constitute the expert panel before going on to the cost performance measure. They are, all of them are parents themselves of children with disabilities who are not connected to the parent centers, but who also have a lot of experience in this. So they're going to be looking at it as both parents and people with other experiences and other kind of information in terms of determining the extent to which the materials show high quality, high relevance, and usefulness. The last long-term measure is the cost measure. As you can see on the screen, the measure is calculated by taking the total number of services provided by the program and dividing by the annual program costs. The services counted are training and individual assistance services provided to individuals, website hits, newsletters sent and attendance at individual meetings. The total cost of the program for the past few years has remained steadily at approximately $27,411,000. So we take the total number of services, we divide it by the cost in order to determine this index. You do not have to do anything. None of the parent centers have to do anything because you provide the Center for Parent Information and Resources with your annual count of the services you provided, and it's this number, which is gathered, as you know, every end of October, early November, and then aggregated across all the parent centers that's used in this calculation. So you've already done your work. You sent in that information to the CIPR, and so therefore that's what it's going to be used on. But you can also see how, in determining that the services you provide are efficient and cost-effective, how important it is to be as accurate as possible and also participate in the annual collection every year. So the rights performance measures is calculated by measuring responses to the selected program measure survey questions, which again, you all will have submitted or will be submitting very soon when you've surveyed the number of parents that you had to survey according to the CIPR. The sampling method used by the CIPR assures that the responses are representative as possible of the parents served by the Parent Center program. They're not necessarily representative of your parents in your individual centers, because some of you only need to send in the results for 2 or 3 of the parents that you surveyed. But across the program, because it's done through a sampling method, we know that this is representative of the parents that are served by the overall program. And this is about measuring the programs, the quality, relevance, and usefulness and the effectiveness of the programs, not of the individual centers. So for the long-term measures about the parents' understanding of idea rights and responsibilities, the measure is calculated from responses to 2 questions. The first question is, the information or support you receive from the parent center met your needs. And the second question is, you were able to understand the information you received from the parent center. Since the responses vary on a 4-point scale from strongly disagree to strongly agree, only those responses that are agree and strongly agree, which you then send on to the CIPR, are counted as indicating an increased knowledge of rights and responsibilities. The total number of positive responses across both questions are then divided by the total number of responses to arrive at a percentage, and that's how that's determined. The second long-term measure about working together is calculated by and the parents' increased capacity to work together with professionals and providers, it's calculated from responses to also two questions. The first question is, you are prepared to use the information you receive from the Parent Center, and the second question is, you feel confident in your ability to work with schools and or service providers to meet the needs of your child. Since the responses also vary on a 4-point scale from strongly disagree to strongly agree, only those that get either agree or strongly agree are counted as indicating an increase of capacity to work with professionals and providers. And then the total number of positive responses across both questions are then divided by the total number of responses to arrive at a percentage. Some of you, for example, find that when you call the parent, they might say, well, I'm not going to answer this question. And people who don't answer this question or the other question for a variety of reasons aren't calculated in the universe of people who respond positively to it because they believe it's either not responsible for it, or there's other reasons why they don't want to necessarily address it. Thank you, Elaine. She answered in the chat space. Suitability is a dimension that is double, not ease, for the usefulness score. Thank you. I also forgot to mention, for those of you who are interested, or the panel of folks, the expert panel that respond to the quality, relevance, and usefulness of the services are usually comprised of between 5 to 7 folks. So their averages are taken together to determine whether or not something is high quality, high relevance, or usefulness. So last year, the collection methodology involved 31 centers across the CPRCs and PTIs that were randomly selected to send in service descriptions for the quality, relevance, and usefulness. First, the centers sent in a list of their 3 best or most effective services. Then the centers were told which of those 3 that they had to submit to the contractor at the time, along with any corresponding descriptions. Centers that had been included in 2016 were not, or were funded for the first time in 2017, which were some of the CPRCs were funded for the very, very first time and never received funding from us. And they were not included in the sampling for 2017.
Quality, relevance, and usefulness scored 100% compared to a target of 93%.
So here's our results. And as you can see that they're really wonderful. For quality, relevance, and usefulness, every single service description was rated as at either 6 or as high as 9. We actually had quite a few services that got the highest rating for quality and for relevance and usefulness. So that was really, really quite good that we had such a high score in 2017. The cost, the index cost, even though we were going for a target of approximately 1.1, the index we were at 0.76, which you know how effective you are and also just how cost effective you are. So it's really an indication of that. And then the rights numbers and the working together numbers are also very high. The actual was 94.1 and 89.9. Again, we don't have targets established yet. We want to sort of have the results for over 2 or 3 years in order to get a sense of what might be a suitable target. We want to set it high enough, but not so high that it's never achievable. So we want to get a sense of what that might look like. But as you can see, it's very high. I also wanted to say that in the past, those of you who have been doing it for years now know that in the past we had targets for quality, relevance, and usefulness as high as 97%. They've been reduced, not because we haven't met them, because we've often met the targets, but rather because we've acknowledged that the targets were so high that if only one center or 2 centers did not meet the target, we would show that we hadn't met the target. And that wasn't really quite fair programmatically to have that happen. So 93% essentially allows in most years approximately 2 centers not to meet the high quality, relevance, or usefulness and still have us meet our targets. So we think that this is probably a much more reasonable target for moving forward. So now that you've seen the past, what's going to happen this year? This year, because of the way in which we do the random sampling and the number of centers that are in the pool, 29 centers across the CPRCs and PTIs have been randomly selected to send in the service descriptions for quality, relevance, and usefulness short-term measures. So the process, aside from the fact that it's a new contractor, isn't really changing a lot. The centers have been notified, and they should send a list of their 3 most effective or best services soon. They will be told which service in their list to send. And then those of you who are chosen and who are part of the 100% that we had in 2017, or are I believe we had 4 new CPRCs funded for the very first time, you're not included in this sample. So you will be included in future years, but not in this sample. So if you did it last year, or if you're a brand new center, you will not be included at all. Okay. The data collection process will occur over roughly 8 weeks from now until March 30th, which will be the very end of that, in terms of what the parent centers have to do, what you all have to do. The contractor and the review panel, that process then extends further into the year. But by March 30th, what you're responsible for as a parent center, it should be over by then. Okay?
Included on the slide are photos of Carrie Willis and Elaine Carlson.
So the collection process, like I said, the Center to Improve Program and Project Performance, otherwise known as CIPP, WestAD will be responsible for data collection and analysis with Carrie Willis, who's on the left, and Elaine Carlson on the right as your primary contacts. Descriptions and corroborating materials must be sent electronically to Carrie and Elaine at a mailbox. Both of them can access CIPP GPRA at westad.com. And I'm going to let them unmute themselves if they'd like to say anything about their work this year.
Hi, everyone. This is Elaine. Just looking forward to working with you, and feel free to reach out if Carrie and I can be helpful in any way. You can reach us at this mailbox, probably the easiest way to get in touch. Look forward to working with you.
Okay. Many of you already know Elaine from some of the work that the wonderful work she did and her other colleagues at WestAD and the CIPP on the parents survey, the data bank of survey questions for the parent centers that we're actually going to be kicking off version 2.0 soon. I just have to get around to gathering a group again. But she was involved with that, and she got to know a lot about the parent centers. And Carrie is relatively new to the program, but I'm looking forward to working with her also. So thank you. Okay. So some tips and things to keep in mind. A definition of service. So you're asked, okay, what are my 3 best services? Well, what's a service? So a service is work performed by an OSEP-funded project to provide information to a specific audience relevant to the improvement of outcomes for children and disabilities. We give some examples here: conducting trainings, leading and convening informational meetings, responding to inquiries from a targeted population, IEP clinics, phone support, IEP meeting supports, intensive TA. I want to stress your website is not a service. You can point to things on your website that could constitute a service. For example, some of you have started to do some self-paced training modules or online webinars that people can access at all days, all times of the day and on weekends and everything else. That is a service, but the website as a whole, it does not constitute a service. So in doing that, when talking about your service and giving them a description, be specific as to what service you're talking about. I'm going to let me go back to that. So, for example, some of the things that you can do is when talking about the service, identify who the target audience might be for some of those services. So in terms of the cost, I'm going too fast. In terms of the cost and long-term collection methodology for 2018, that will also be done the same way. We're going to be using your November 2017 parent-centered data collection numbers. We will then look at the long-term measures, even though they're officially not collected in 2018. We'll get a sense of what those numbers might look like based on the results of the questions on the program measure survey. And because, again, you do that when you've done that when you send information to the SIPR, you will not be able to, nobody will have to send any kind of additional information to CIPP or to OSEP about that. So the collection timeline. The centers were notified of their selection in January 26th. If you haven't gotten it and you were selected, again, please check your spam folders. By February 9th, which is a little bit, about 2 weeks, you should send CIPP your list of the top 3 services with telling us what the services are in a very brief sentence or two describing what those 3 services are. By March 9th, the CIPP will notify the centers of which of those 3 services you are to work out a full service description for. And then by March 30th, you will submit the service description and supporting materials to the CIPP. Okay? If at any point this timeline proves difficult for whatever reason, please be sure to contact CIPP and let them know, and we'll work with you, but we believe this gives people a lot of time, and it's really important that we stick to this collection, to this timeline as much as possible. So what are some tips for submitting the top 3 services? Be specific about your proposed submission. Don't write telephone assistance, but write something like individual technical assistance to families on post-school transition. So talk about, how you handled the telephone assistance to people who are going through transition. Not workshops, again, that's too general, but an example might be the title of the workshop, Transitioning to Life After School Training for Youth. Choose services that have accompanying materials to support the services, whether they're documents, checklists, web pages, worksheets. Most, in the past few years, we've seen more and more people simply doing hyperlinks because so many of your materials are available now in web links, and that's really, really useful to the reviewers to have these kind of accompanying materials to support your description. So provide that as much as possible. And think of services that have those kinds of supporting materials too. The quality, in terms of your service descriptions, I want to stress that the quality of the written description of services correlates very to high reviewer ratings. The reviewers don't know what your service is in any other way other than the written material, the written description you provide, and the accompanying materials that go with that description. So it's really important that you have a really high-quality written description that does justice to the kind of work that you're doing through your service. Read the criterion for this carefully and respond fully and clearly to that criterion. We give suggestions as to roughly how long the service description should be. 50 pages is too much. You want it to be long enough to be careful and full responses to the criterion without overwhelming or being too much for the reviewers. So we give some guidance on that too. Guide your readers to how they would respond to the criteria when filling out their sheets in terms of rating your work. Share your description with other people. Show it to other people. Have them, board members are very good for this because they can sort of look at this and go, I'm not following this, or I don't understand it, because sometimes when you do something day after day after day, it's very hard for you to describe something you do all the time. So they would be really good readers to let you know where you might need to put in more additional information. And then proofread carefully. If there are a lot of mistakes or typos, that can often be very annoying to the reviewers. So it's important that you proofread carefully, and that's, again, where you get into involving others. Okay. And technical assistance. Within the parentcenterhub.org, there is a program measures collection work group. It gets very, very active around now, then goes dormant for a while, and then gets active again next year when we do this again. I posted, I believe it was 7 exemplars that got very, very high scores in 2017. I posted those descriptions on that workgroup space so you can download them. In addition, you can download the exemplars from 2007, the exemplars that were used in the 2017 collection they did in 2016. You can go backwards through the posting in that workgroup and see those. So those are good examples of what are descriptions that get very, very high scores from the reviewers, and that can help guide your work. The regional PTACs can provide technical assistance to help you write strong service descriptions. And very occasionally, in the past, we've had to have conference calls with individual projects. Usually it's around very, very specific issues with the service or the center. But that can be arranged if you need additional assistance. Like I said, it's relatively rare, but if you need it, we can figure out a way to have this work out, okay? And please, 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 by all means, take advantage of that. I just want to show you the CIPRA workspace for its performance measures collection.
A sample workgroup web page is displayed.
And that's it. So thank you for all that you do to support families of children with disabilities in your area.